Hey, welcome back to Metropol Grid. My name is Andre. Thanks so much for tuning in. We've been gone for a while off YouTube, haven't been doing a lot of videos. We have been streaming now on YouTube. Hopefully that's been all right for you. But normally we do the data pack unboxings, and I've kind of been really interested in get back in those. So made some time, excited to talk about this. This is Down the White Nile, which is the second data pack in the Kitara Cycle. The Kitara Cycle just begun about a month ago. We had the first data pack that came out, Sovereign Sight. Now we didn't unbox that one. I'm going to try and work backwards just so we catch up to the modern stuff, because this data pack just came out on Thursday of last week. So it's rather fresh and there's some really exciting stuff in it. So I'm pretty amped to talk about these cards. This is, the second data pack in the Kitara Cycle. That means it's taking place in Africa. It deals with the Sub-Saharan League and the construction of a new beanstalk, like a new space elevator. I might be mistaken on that. But we have 9 runner cards to talk about. If you're new to this sort of thing, we go actually pretty in depth to talk about these cards. We talk about the competitive viability, what you could do with them, some of the fun stuff, the flavor. It's pretty in depth and they go on for a bit. I am aware of that. So if you want to jump around to a single specific card, there are timestamps in the description below. That's what they're for. Don't feel bad about doing that. Spoilers, some of the better cards are at the end of this pack. So do hold on. So let's jump into it. We got runner cards and we'll start down the White Nile. Firstly, just to talk a bit about the White Nile. The White Nile is actually like a real river. It's one of the tributaries that deposits into, I think that's what tributaries are, into the actual Nile. It's right here in South Sudan, or at least that's where part of it's marked on Google Maps. There's the White Nile and the Blue Nile, and they go into the Nile, which goes all the way up through like Egypt, and it's the big old river, the biggest in Africa, if I'm not mistaken, but that's where we are. We're going to start here. This is our Anna card. It's our first Anna card. It's called Acacia. It's a hardware. It costs 1 credit to install. It's only 1 influence. Super easy to splash. And says, whenever the core purges virus counters, you may gain a credit for each virus counter removed, and then trash Acacia. So Acacia, it's named after a real thing. Acacia is a type of shrub or tree. You can probably see a little picture of what it looks like above there. These are, I believe, they're native to Africa and Australia. You probably have seen this tree before in wildlife photos. Very pretty, has these yellow little flowers and sometimes looks like that good old tree. Now, you can see in the picture here, it's also a tree. And how deep do its roots grow? We don't know. So this is an interesting card. It is a card that supports the virus archetype. And the virus archetype is something that FFG, Fantasy Flight Games, has kind of reset. We used to have Noise in Netrunner, and Noise did rotate out of the new core set. So the idea of viruses, what viruses means to Anarchs, is going to be re-explored in a very meaningful way. And we started to see that. There's one card that came in Sovereign Sight, the previous data pack we haven't talked about just yet, that really supports viruses, and I'm expecting to see more like that. If also you pay attention to Netrunner, the Fantasy Flight Games' marketing material, they have spoiled the upcoming Anarch ID from the cycle, who's coming in the next, or in one of the data packs in the near future, that deals with viruses in a very meaningful way. So it's cool to see them deal with viruses again, and it's we don't know exactly how it's going to go, so it's kind of hard to evaluate currently how good Acacia is or what you can do with it. So what does Acacia do? It does basically one thing, or actually kind of 2 things. It gives you credits. And it gives you credits if the corp purges and if you have a lot of virus counters, which is pretty conditional. I'm assuming that a lot of these builds for the new upcoming Anarch ID are going to have a lot of virus counters inherently, and you don't actually have to work for them. So it seems like it might give you economy just while you're doing the thing that you want to do anyways, which is generally a good thing in Netrunner. As opposed to that, what does this work with right now? Because we don't have all those cards, let alone that ID. And we actually have a lot of cards that do accrue virus counters continually, and actually are kind of require the corp to purge at some point. A big card that does that is Amakua. Amakua is a turtle. It's an AI that kind of snowballs out of control if you don't deal with it. It becomes one of the best breakers in the game if you don't purge, and the amount of virus counters on this can get out of hand, so it might be easy to get some Acacia value. On top of that, we have cards like Darwin, which is less popular, or God of War, which do continually get virus counters, and at some point the corp might be interested in purge. Now, we saw this in the last pack. This is the beginning of what I was talking about with a card called Yusuf. And Yusuf, we are assuming, now I know there has been spoilers of some of the upcoming cards in the cycle, and I'm not going to directly address those because I don't think everyone wants to be spoiled. Maybe I've already said too much, but I think it's safe to say that we're going to see more viruses that work like this, a full breaker suite even. I don't know. If that's the case, so far we only have this one, but this is a breaker that requires viruses, so purging has a lot of value, because without virus counters, it's actually useless. And I think if you have more of these, you might have a lot of virus counters very quickly, because they seem to get them when you make a successful run. And if you have 3 of these installed, or 1 of each breaker suite, a successful run gives you 3 virus counters. So Acacia value, it might be actually okay. It's also worth knowing that there's a lot of viruses that this doesn't work with. Any virus that has no virus counters, that doesn't require a lot, things like Clot, it's not really a good idea to put Acacia in there. Hivemind, by the way, is interesting. It wasn't that clear to me, but I believe it's ruled that if Hivemind has 6 virus counters on it, and you have another virus that has no virus counters, when you purge, Acacia gives you 6 credits, not 12. Because it doesn't double the virus counters, they're just considered to be in 2 places at once. Schrodinger's virus counters or something like that. Now, there are other ways to get continual virus counters just going on your end. One of the ways is Virus Breeding Grounds, a card that we'll talk about, I think, later in this data pack as well, but actually is getting more and more useful considering how those new Anarch breakers are actually worded. You also have Incubator, which is maybe a card that actually encourages the Corp to purge, but I think since Medium and Parasite, largely Medium, have rotated out of the card pool, there's not that much reason to be scared of Incubator, so I don't even know if this card's that playable. And I think actually there's a lot of flexibility with Acacia based on how it's worded. When I originally read this card, I didn't realize how generous the wording was, and I wasn't the biggest fan of it. And there's 2 really important terms on this card that make it a lot easier to play than you might think. Firstly, it says you may gain a credit for each virus counter and trash Acacia. And that may is a really big deal, because if the Corp purges and you don't want to use your Acacia, maybe you're only having 3 virus counters being removed, you don't have to use Acacia. And that's a really big deal, because it lets you choose when to fire it, and it makes it so easy to install at any point in the game. We've seen a bunch of combo cards like this that if the Corp does something, they fire right away. So you're trying to hold the card in your hand and fire it at a certain time or install it at a certain time. And Acacia's kind of install and forget. There's no particularly tricky timing. You put it on the table, you're good to go. Just intelligently decide when you want to fire its ability, and that's really good. Second part is that the trashing of Acacia is not actually an additional cost. It's not a cost of the ability, it's kind of like an added effect, which means that you can prevent it. If you use cards like Sacrificial Construct or even Dummy Box, if you want to go near infinite with your Acacia value, your Acacia can stay there and you can get the credits. So you can purge twice, 3 times, 7 times, and you continue to get Acacia value. Admittedly, once they purge, your virus counters are gone, so it'll be a while, but that's the idea. So is this a good economy card? In a virus-based deck, it might be, but the problem is it's really slow and you don't know how reliable it is. A big question is going to come up, obviously, of how good the virus cards are, how quickly they snowball out of control, how often Corps purge. But if you want to just put a card on the table and expect it to give some amount of credits while you click and do nothing, while you don't have to click at it, there's already some pretty easy ways to get money. The very vanilla standard one is Daily Casts. Install this for 3, and then without spending any more clicks, you gain 5 credits. Now, for Acacia, how many virus counters have to be purged for this to be good? If we get purged 6 virus counters, then this gives you 5 credits, which is basically daily cast value. The question is, how easy is that going to happen? And having burst economy versus drip economy, what's better? Now, also a big part of Acacia that has to be considered is that it's not only an econ card, but it does encourage the corpse perhaps not to purge viruses. And I think if these breakers that we've seen, or Amakua and Yusef and stuff like that, get out of control, the corp probably has to purge regardless. But maybe if you're running some amount of these viruses, maybe this is enough to make the corp not purge. We've seen other cards like that, cards like Fester. Fester's a very interesting card, and I think will get more interesting once we have more viruses upcoming. But Fester also highly disincentivizes the corp from purging, and the question is, what's more disincentivizing? Losing money or gaining, or having the runner gain money? And I think actually Fester might be more scary. Another big issue about the Acacia is that if the corp purges and you gain 7 credits, if your breaker suite is based off of Yusuf and friends, assuming there's friends, how are you going to use those credits? Are you actually going to swing around and install your I don't know, your paperclip and start using that as a breaker? Because it looks like these sort of breaker suites actually need only viruses as their economy and don't actually need credits. So that's kind of interesting. You're going to need a deck that requires both. Also, for what it's worth, this is not at all. These are not unique cards. You can strap 6 of these down on the table and make purging really bad. Question is also, can you force the corp to purge? And largely, it's difficult. Cyberdeck's Virus Suite, you might not notice, it says you may purge. So if you find one of these in archives and you have like 20 virus counters and you want to get your Acacia value, the corp just can say no. On the opposite side, you have Macrophage, which if the trace fires and you lose it, the corp has to purge. So you can actually go get Acacia value on your own terms. Overall, it's hard to evaluate this card when we don't have the rest of the viruses. I think this card is not going to be as reliable unless the corps actively have to purge over and over again, which might be the case. And even if you install this and get 3 credits, is it worth a card slot? I don't know. I think you have to get like 5 or 6 credits for this thing to be really good, and you need a way to leverage those credits, which so far with the breakers that we've seen, doesn't seem to be that big of an issue. So I'm not actually sure, but because we're talking about viruses, we might as well talk about the next card coming up, which is our friend here, Plague, or Plague. I need to address that I don't know how to say this word, and I've said it wrong for most of my life, and I'm so confused I don't know which way is right. I think Plague is wrong, but that's how I say it. That is all. This is 2 credits to install. It's 1 MU. It's 2 influence, which is not bad. It's a virus program, and it says when you install Plague, choose a server. That can't be right, is that? Whenever you make a successful run on that chosen server, you may place 2 virus counters on Plague. Crap. Okay, so you pick a server and you get additional value when you run that server, which is something we've seen before on cards. Specifically, you might recognize Emergent Contract. The card's so nice, they banned it. Because it was too good. You picked any server and you made it basically 4 credits cheaper to run it. And maybe Plague is that same way. Maybe with Yusuf, that could be, like 1 strength, 1 subroutine value, and you get more value for running that server, and you spiral out of control once you have your Yusuf and its Code Gate and its Sentry equivalent, and this is what you need to keep rolling and make it impossible for the corp to lock you out, or maybe they purge and then you're screwed. But the idea is that it gives you value for doing a thing that you wanted to do anyways, and in Netrunner, that's very, very good. Emergent Contract was very, very good for that reason. Also, in theory for Plague, you can target an uniced remote, similar or an iced server, similar to Emergent Contract, and go get your virus counters all at once. And maybe that's what you need to make Acacia good. Maybe that's what you need to put your breakers back online, but that's definitely interesting. 2, also make a successful run to get 2 of anything is similar to security testing. It's very important to notice, I did not realize that immediately, that this does not replace the access step, which means it's additional value. This is a bit trickier because you don't actually access cards. Now again, we don't know how good this is, because we don't know how good virus counters are, and specifically this is a weird card because it puts the virus counters on Plague itself, and there's no card in the game that can utilize virus counters on another card besides Yusuf. Which means we're assuming there's going to be more of these breakers, but how good this card is largely depends on how good these breakers are, or any other card that deals with virus counters on a different card, because there's no way to transfer them. If you want to use Data Suckers or any other virus that uses counters, Gravedigger, whatever, you can't move these over. So this card is like really closely tied with the value of cards we haven't seen yet. So it's hard to say. We do have some support here with like Progenitor, idea that you can install this on this to not take up MU, because this does take up MU and it could be an issue. Progenitor is also really good with Yusuf, so not hard to assume you have a lot of these in the deck. But lastly, just to quickly look at Virus Breeding Grounds. If you want a support card in your deck to print virus counters, what works better for you? Virus Breeding Grounds and Plague cost the same. One of them is passive, one of them requires you to interact with the corp. And I think it's cool that you have choices here. Which one's going to be proven to be better depends on the decks, and again, things we haven't seen yet. But support for an archetype we haven't seen here has already been laid. I'm excited to see that archetype be revealed in the next 4 months. Because viruses are cool, and I don't like noise that much. I'm glad he's gone. We got criminal stuff. This is credit kiting. It's a 0-cost event, free event. It says play only if you made a successful run on a central server this turn. Install a card from your grip, lowering its install cost by 8 credits. Whoa, but then you gotta take a tag. It's also 3 influence, which means it's vaguely splashable. Now, the first thing to definitely mention with this card, and this is probably to the chagrin of many Netrunner players, this is not a Count Siphon. Now, Account Siphon did rotate in the revised core set. We don't have any card like Account Siphon. I believe in the marketing material, Fantasy Flight Games said there will be a new Account Siphon coming up. And people saw the this art spoiled before with only seeing the art and seeing someone like take money in a circle or something like that. And they assumed credit kiting was Account Siphon, and lo and behold, it's not an Account Siphon. So that's upsetting. This is Account Siphon. But it's still an interesting enough card, and maybe Account Siphon is still coming. I think it has to be, considering what they've said. Also funny, the text on these things are backwards. Does that mean it shows it different on each side? Like that's how technology works? That shouldn't be a hang up. Cards that install other cards for a rebate are actually really good in Netrunner, and it's not obvious how good they are, but like if you compare two of the standard sort of economy cards you're probably playing in Criminal, something like Sure Gamble gives you 4 credits. Something like Career Fair gives you 3 credits and installs a card for the same click. Now you can click for a credit, but a lot of times in good quote unquote like efficient Netrunner decks, your clicks are worth more than a single credit. A lot of times you're not going to be clicking for a credit, so having a click is better than saving a credit. I think in my roundabout convoluted way, a lot of times I'm more excited to draw Career Fair in my opening hand than Sure Gamble. Depending on the deck, I'm saying install reduced cost cards are a bit better than they look because they're super compact. They do a lot in a very small 1-card package. And this in theory does a ton in a 1-card package, but I think it's only efficient if the conditions that it's doing are not that, like they're not hamstringing you to do something that you don't generally want to do. Because there's a lot of conditions attached to this card. There's actually like a ton as opposed to Career Fair. So if we just look at the raw economy, let's look at it if we do this the bad way. So say we have to do a couple things to make this work. We have to run a central server, so that's a click. We have to install the card, that's going to happen anyways. And then a lot of times you're going to want to clear the tag, right? So running costs a click. You could have clicked for a credit, I guess. Installing the card you're going to do anyways, and then you have to remove the tag, which costs you 2 credits and a click. So say that's about, you're spending like 5 credits to install a card, reducing its cost by 8. Which means the card should cost about 4 to 5 credits for this to be good, even more. I think I goofed my math a bit, but the point is, if you're installing a card that costs 4 with this, I think it's not good. Unless the other parts of this are not that big of an issue. Like if that's only, I'm considering that's only, the math is only that bad if you're like running archives to access nothing, installing your 4-cost console, clicking to remove the tag. If you do that, I think this card is super inefficient. So the question is how to make this efficient. And there's actually like a lot of ways. There's a lot of ways to make this good. Firstly, let's talk about the clauses in order. Play only if you made a successful run on the central server this turn. Criminals like to do that. There's criminals that like to run central servers every single turn. Gabriel Santiago is a good idea or a good option. You want to run HQ to get your 2 credits. You're going to do that anyways, so credit kiting has less of a condition attached to it. Another good example is Silhouettes. You want to run HQ maybe to get your expose, less of a cost up front. You're going to do it anyways. Let's remove that cost from the equation. Next, Dirty Laundry. Yeah, that's another good card. If you're going to run anyways to get money, okay. Now it makes running archives for no reason slightly better. Still not the best thing you should be doing. Next, you need to install a card. And you want the card to cost 8 credits to get the most value out of it. Nobody loves career fairing a card that costs 2. It's never a good feeling. So what options do we have? And this is mind you any card. It doesn't have to be program hardware. It can be anything, which basically also means resource. And there's some options. These are all the hardware, and I think to get maximum value out of this, it needs to be about 5 or plus credits. Does that mean you can run Gauntlet cheaply? Maybe. Does that mean you can install Daredevil? I don't know. I think the 2 best options currently in the game for hardware is Maw, which is really expensive, and Security Nexus, which is maximum value, and we'll talk about this later, and that's pretty good. You can also do programs. There's a couple good options for programs. I was testing this out in an aggressive criminal deck that really wants to be running often. So being able to install an Kuza for cheap, that lets you like rip up ice so you can continue to get value out of Gabriel Santiago, for example. It's cool. It's cool to see this card in criminal. Same with Inversificator, which has a really expensive upfront cost. If you can avoid that, sometimes you could snowball by rearranging servers in a way that's good for you so you can continue to get your economy going. I think by far the easiest is Femme Fatale, which for 1 credit on top of your credit kiting, you get a pretty good universally, like you get this weird bypass breaker and like a not terrible killer. And that's a really big deal if, say, you want to go really early aggressive and like jam one of these down and then like start spamming indexings or legworks, or like you run archives, install Femme Fatale legwork is a turn 1 play. In theory. Funny other includes, there's not a lot of good for resources because resources, the tag matters, and not a lot of the really expensive resources. There are about 4 credits that are good. Hilariously, if you install Rachel Beckman, she immediately disappears. Props to whoever does that. And then it comes to the tag part. That's largely the options you have when installing this thing. There's not that much. I think the biggest shame is right now Blackguard rotated, because I think this is one of the cards that screams Blackguard. Because if you could install this thing for 3 credits, it's so much easier to use, because 11 was kind of nuts. But these don't exist at the same time, which is a sad time. Now the tag. Does the tag matter? If you want the tag to matter, you have a couple options to get rid of it. You have Crash Space in the core set, which lets you remove the tag, still for a click, sure, but it's free, so you get more value. You can also avoid the tag because it's not an additional cost, it's kind of like an effect, just like we talked about Acacia. So you can avoid the tag if you want. You have Forger to do that, there's some other options. And I think by far the best is actually Citadel Sanctuary. A card that is in meta if you want to deal with meat damage, and also just deals with tags in a clickless way as long as you have the cash to back it up, which you might. And I think that's a really cool combo, these two together. Yeah, this is what I was talking about in the early game. If you just like get a Fem down turn 1 or turn 2, indexing kind of can be trivial, and I think that's really interesting. Now also, if you want to install a program, you need the program in hand, and that's actually like a really big thing with credit kiting, is you need multiple things in hand at the same time for it to be good. Like if you're going to play a deck that has a bunch of Ankuzas and like Inversificators and Fems in them, and then you don't draw your credit kiting, you're like super dead in the water, because you need one to play the other, let alone you need a central run. Like there's so many conditions for this to line up to be good, it's actually really scary. The good way to get around that is either be able to pull your breakers to hand if you're installing breakers. Not a hard thing to do if you have special order. You also just like good card draw is really important, because you want to be able to have both of your things in hand at the same time. Otherwise, it's really clumsy, and that's what I've experienced so far in my time. Is that it's maybe a bit too clumsy. I pulled up Geist. I don't know why. Oh yeah, so I think one of the best things you can do this out of the box with the current cards that we printed is actually the Security Nexus route. And I think if you take just about any criminal that has Link, I think we only have like 2 right now, Geist and Nero. If you credit kiting out, like you could turn 1 credit kiting out a Security Nexus for free. And then because you do have the Link, you can go ahead and have the Citadel Sanctuary, which removes the credit kiting tag. That actually is like a pretty compelling package. That you were able to free install your Nexus and always credit kiting for the rest of the game without having to deal with the tag. I think that's kind of cool. And I think that might be playable. Overall, I've experimented with this card a fair bit, and I think it's a bit clumsier than it looks. I think it's really cool that you can like tempo out a Fem. I think if you float the tag too, by the way, which is totally an option, if you just want to use this as a cheap install and then keep running with some sort of tag me deck, that might be fine too. Depending on how scary tags are in your meta, maybe you should or shouldn't do that, but it's not Account Siphon. But this card definitely does get better the more expensive programs get printed, the more expensive hardware, and it scales like so. But maybe this is all the early aggression you need to get that early Fem down to lock down HQ every turn, but you just have to hope you draw well, which not always is in your control. We have a second criminal card. This is called Wari. Wari. I'm not sure how to pronounce this one. It's 1 to install. It's 1 MU. It's a unique program, so you only got 1 Wari. It says the first time you make a successful run on HQ each turn, you may trash Wari to name either Sentry, Cogate, or Barrier, and then expose 1 piece of ice, add it to HQ if it has that named subtype. And it's 4 influence, and it has a quote from 419, which, if you're reading the marketing material, is an upcoming criminal ID in this faction. Spoilers, light spoilers. The criminal deals with expose heavily, which makes sense because this card does expose and requires expose in some way to make it reliable. What is Wari? I did some research. Wari is also a river in northern Ethiopia. Is that the reason why this is called that? Is that a river? I don't know. More likely Wari in Hausa, which is a Chadic language, if I'm not mistaken, means a pungently bad scent or smell, which maybe makes sense considering this thing used to be called, I think Adam Doyle tweeted this piece of art, the artist. By the way, this art's fucking awesome. He tweeted this, and I think this card was originally called Sniffer, and then they changed the name to Wari. So maybe Sniffer, because it's smelling, and you smell the smell. I don't know. Anyways, it's hard to look up that word. This is an anteater. That's an anteater. So how do you play this card? This card, what does it do, and what conditions are attached to it? And let me tell you, there's an absurd amount of conditions attached to this card. Firstly, for this card to be useful, you need to have an unres piece of ice on the board, and you need to want to bounce it. You also need to know what kind of ice it is, what sort of type it is, and how do you know that for sure? You probably want to expose it before Wari exposes it. You also need to run HQ. and you need to have this installed before you run HQ the first time. There's so many things lining up, and I think the effect, while it might be potent in certain situations, it's hard for it to be potent all the time. And I'm not entirely convinced, but let's talk about a bit what you can do with it, because it's a cool effect at least, right? So best thing to do with this is if you know what the ice is, for sure there's no risk. I think playing this with a risk and guessing Code Gate Sentry Barrier, it would be pretty lame. So the best one is Silhouette currently. So Silhouette, if you run HQ, you can use Silhouette's ability first to reveal a piece of ice that's unresed and see it's a Code Gate, and then you can fire your Wari, so it's Code Gate. Actually, like a funny thing that makes Wari kind of bad is that this fires the first time you make a successful run. So right when the run's considered successful, you have to fire off Wari, which means you bounce the ice to HQ, which means you have a chance of accessing the ice for HQ. So if you're running HQ to maybe do a good access on HQ, and then run a remote or something like that, like it just makes your value of the HQ run technically worse unless you wanted to access ice, which is super unlikely. So that kind of sucks. You also get more value with Zamba. This is an exposed card, and Zamba gets more value because it's not capped to the first time per turn by as many times as you can expose. So in theory with Zamba, Wari is kind of free, and that does help it a lot. 1 credit isn't a lot, but paying a card slot, let alone install, it might be a problem. Now, what does Wari do? Wari removes an ice off of the board, so it makes it hard. Say the corp wants to rush behind a single piece of ice in the early game. They can't, because you could run HQ or install Wari, run HQ, bounce the ice, run for the remote, and that's not something Criminal couldn't do already. A lot of times you have to respect Inside Job when playing against Criminal, a card that's been there since the original core set, and I guess Inside Job actually does combo well with Wari. With a single Wari and an Inside Job, any 2-iced remote is susceptible. I guess if you wanted to go DDoS for some reason, that's also a thing, that Wari DDoS means a 2-ice remote isn't safe. This also does in theory combo with D-res effects, things like Saker, because if you D-res a piece of ice, then you know what it is, so Wari's a safe bet to return it to HQ. Mind you, also returning to HQ means that the corp has to spend click and sometimes credits reinstalling it, so you do rob some tempo from the corp. Leave no trace is also an option in theory. Now we've seen cards like this, cards that are very specific. This one says basically 1 piece of ice, I'm going to remove it from the game, or from the table, excuse me, for this turn. How much value is that? And we've seen Careful Planning, we've seen cards like this, and this shouldn't be a direct comparison because Shapers are generally better at breaking ice as opposed to Criminals, but cards like this in Shaper that say like, oh, this 1 piece of ice I'm targeting, and Careful Planning doesn't have to be ice specifically, can't be res, so it's like it's not there. And I've never seen Careful Planning see play in almost any deck. Just because the card slot and what it does and its conditionality and how expensive Careful Planning is, I feel like that's the same way with Wari, where for what it does versus all the things that have to line up, it's probably just not worth it. I guess there's some value with unscheduled maintenance. Maybe you bounce ice and then you bounce another ice and they can't install any of it. They trash ice. I don't know. I think this also compares to Maxwell James, which if you have one card in your deck that like deals with ice in a negative way and lets you bypass it largely, Maxwell James is strictly better. While it is unique, it does give you a link, it doesn't take up MU, and its ability is largely just kind of good. And Wari kind of struggles. There's just way too many things going on with this one. Now, Wari could become really good once we see more Criminal cards in the cycle. Exposed seems to be a thing that FFG really wants to push forward, so maybe this gets better for that reason. If we get more cards that say, like, reveal cards in HQ, and now you know what card is in HQ, Wari gets a lot better for that reason. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw things like that. But as of now, if you're just putting an ice back into the hand to slow the corp down or so you can inside job a remote, I think there's better ways to do it that are just easier. They probably have less cute art, though, which is a shame. Kabonesa, woo. The Netspace Thrillseeker, she is the new Shaper identity for the cycle. She's coming in 45.15, standard Netrunner fare. She has a Link. Don't undervalue Link. Link is really good. And she has a cool ability. For a click, you search your stack for a non-virus program, install it, lowering its cost by 1, its install cost by 1 credit. Then you go ahead and shuffle your stack. If that program is still installed when your turn ends, you gotta remove it from the game. So she tutors things, and then they go. If they're still on the table, they're removed from game. No recursion for you. FFG's been putting their foot down on recursion in a large way for the last couple cycles. I'm largely glad about how they're doing it, and this is a good example. Firstly, it's cool to see Kabonesa. We thought we would see her in the last cycle. She seemed to be like really hinted at being in the Mars cycle, but now she's finally here. We had a lot of cards with her on it, let alone her flavor text, and she never showed up, which was upsetting, but she's here. That's good. Another big shout out, you see that raccoon? This has been going on in the Netrunner lore for a while. This is the Record Reconstructor Raccoon. It's been here. I remember this very well. It also showed up on Data Breach. The Record Reconstructor Raccoon. Is that her raccoon? Because it seemed like her raccoon. And that was like, this is a really old card, which I don't know whether they started to like appropriate these things at some later point, but that's dope. If there's some more Record Reconstructor Raccoons, let me know if you find them on card art, because I want to see how deep this raccoon hole goes. Kabonesa, she's cool. She's an interesting ability. She tutors cards from her deck, which is something that Shapers largely can already do. So let's hope that she can do something interesting with it. So firstly, search your stack for a non-virus. This clause of doing things with non-virus programs has been showing up more and more in Netrunner for the last little while. A lot of cards that deal with programs, program tutoring, program moving around, have begun to say non-virus more clearly as Netrunner has evolved, and I think that's really cool. Why is that a big deal for Kabonesa? Well, I think if it didn't say that, most Kabonesa decks would be running like 3 copies of Cash, so you can click for 3 credits and remove 3 cards from your deck 3 times in a turn, so you can start your first turn almost definitively with 14 credits and 3 cards left in your stack. That's pretty good. Also say they reprint a new Parasite. That's kind of a big deal because she can pull it out, but I think largely the idea that viruses are strictly an Anarch thing has been more confidently pushed by Fantasy Flight in the last while, and I'm excited to see that. So what can you do with this ability? Because any card that you pull out of your deck either has to be value right away, or you shouldn't be sad when it gets removed from the game. And there's actually like a lot of compelling options of what to use. Now, firstly, let's look at some programs that don't matter. Like the programs that you're going to destroy the turn you pull them out anyways. And for a click, you can pull in self-modifying code, which is one of the best Shaper cards. It lets you, for 2 credits at instant speed, find whatever program you want and install it. And if you Kabonesa up your self-modifying code and then trash it, it doesn't matter. It won't be removed from the game if you've already destroyed it yourself. Which means if Kabonesa has enough economy, on turn 1, she can contest just about any remote in the game, because almost 100% she will be able to have access to self-modifying code. And that's really strong. That's also kind of a problem with Kabonesa, is that if you're just using her to pull self-modifying codes out, like self-modifying code is a card that already exists in any other Shaper, and being able to find it that early, I don't know if that's that important of an ID ability, considering we've had so many other ID abilities that help you set up quickly. Things like Isla, which kind of in some way feel like Kabonesa, which I'm more what I'm trying to focus on is I think we have to build Kabonesa in a wildly different way and kind of capitalize on her strengths. Otherwise, she might just be like a slightly off flavor Isla or Haley. I think one of the best interactions with Kabonesa is actually Chameleon. This one's really cute, right? So for 1 credit, Chameleon comes out of your deck, and Chameleon says at the end of the grip, return to your hand, or sorry, at the end of your turn, return to your grip. And you can fire that before Kabonesa tries to remove the Chameleon from the game, and you're good. So at any point, you can click for this 1 credit, 3 strength universal breaker, pseudo universal, and it'll always return to your hand, which is good because you can't be rushed out by that vanilla, which is a play that happens in Netrunner modernly. If you want to play Chameleon, maybe you want a Dinosaurus, just to keep that going. You have a 5 strength breaker. You're going to have to install it over and over again, which might suck, but you have something going on there. Another really easy way, and again, non-virus, how this shows up before, is Brahmin. Brahmin's actually like a really well-statted AI breaker. 1 credit to break 2 subroutines is good, but it is hungry, and it requires you to feed cards into the top of your deck. So with Kabonesa, you can install something for free, maybe it's a 1 credit program, and then always be able to bring it back. Now that's probably really slow on clicks, but it's technically okay. If you install a program and return it to the top of your deck, it won't be removed from game. There's some value there. I'm not convinced. A lot of times being able to install multiple cards for a single click with Haley is probably better with Brahmin, as long as you have card draw. I don't know, but it's definitely a thing you can do. Also, cards that have limited use are really good with Kabonesa. If you want to spend 2 influence, you got the grappling hook. If it's a fire and forget thing, or fire once and it's done, so you don't mind if you pay 1 credit to pull this from your deck. You other have things like David. David's really good. While it is 4 influence, if you pull David for your deck, get full value out of it from a turn, that's pretty great. You also have Lady, which has a limited shelf life. If you want to use all of your Lady in your turn, and then you don't mind if it gets removed from the game, you're doing pretty well for yourself. And on top of that, Scavenge is a really big card for Kabonesa. Now, Scavenge says you can trash a program and install another program from your grip or heap, so you can install the same program you've trashed. The idea is, say that you Kabonesa tutor up a David, and then once your David is done or before your turn ends, you can scavenge it, which means you trash your David to reinstall your David. And as far as Kabonesa's ability is concerned, you're not going to remove the David from the game because this is technically a different David. Same with Lady, and so forth and so forth. Then it lets you get around Kabonesa's ability, which is really cool. So any card you want to install for cheap from your deck, go ahead and scavenge it. If you have a scavenge in hand, turn 1 Magnum Opus, get it on the table, get it scavenged. You're in a good spot, and that's kind of cool. Other options for scavenge are really good with Cyber Cipher. Being able, even maybe, is that how you play Kabonesa? Pull out cheap, super efficient breakers that you don't mind if they're removed from a game. So maybe you have to play 3 Cyber Ciphers and you pull them out. I don't know. You also have options with uninstall to bring cards back your hand so they're not removed from the game. Rosetta Stone, or not Rosetta Stone, Rosetta 2.0 is technically an option. With 4 influence, you can install a program and then remove it from the game to install another program for cheap and technically gain a credit of value. And I don't know, this one seems a bit convoluted, but there's a thing here. Also, if you're going to install a lot of things, maybe you want Technical Writer. Funny enough, actually, Sahasrara is actually tempo positive if you start removing these from your deck. So like, because that's what I'm super surprised. Normally an ability like this on an ID would say once per turn, but you can actually do this 4 times a turn. So in theory, and this is not really great, but you can install a Sahasrara for 1 credit, install the second Sahasrara for like free and have like 1 recurring credit or 3, and then install the third one. I think you have like 4 recurring credits by the end of the turn. Installing more Sahasraras is technically credit positive, which is all I'm saying. I just don't see why you'd need to install all 3 because they get removed from the game. But installing 1 and then installing another program technically is like clicking for credit. The thing that I don't get is Daredevil, which seems to be, considering she's the Thrillseeker and her quote is on it, it seems to be her console. But I don't see any utility between these two, considering that I believe her ability wants cards in her deck. Unless this is the Brahmin that you want, that you need your Daredevil to draw the Brahmin cards and then they're in hand, but then you need a way to install them on your table, so maybe you play... I don't know how to install them. Did Savoir Faire rotate? I think it did. Yeah, it did. So, I don't know. It's a thing, but Kabonesa, it's cool. I think as soon as you get more and more programs that are either single use, that are cheap to install, stuff like that, she gets a lot better. And I'm excited to see that. I'm also excited to see where the Record Reconstructor Raccoon goes. And we have Takobi. Takobi, it is also another Hausa word. It means dagger. This shouldn't be a surprise. You've seen the art. Hausa, by the way, it's a Chadic language. It's spoken by a lot of people. It's like 27 million people are speaking this as a primary language. Secondary language is another 20 million. It is the ancestral language of the Hausa people. It's one of the largest ethnic groups in Central Africa. So this language is largely spoken in southern Nigeria, and has moved across most of Western Africa. So we've been seeing a lot of words, a lot of names that are from African languages. It's really cool to know where they come from and what they mean and how I'm going to say them incorrectly. Takobi is a knife. So Takobi is a shaper program. It's 2 to install 1 MU, and it says whenever you break all subroutines on a piece of ice during a single encounter, place a power counter on Takobi. Then you can trade in 2 hosted power counters at instant speed to choose a non-AI icebreaker, and that icebreaker is going to get +3 strength until the end of the current encounter, when standard breaking just doesn't cut it. Get it? Cut. It's 3 influence. It's cool. It's a support card. It's unique, so you can't spam out many of them, but it basically gives you power counters, which can never be removed besides your choice, which saves you money on boosting strength. This in some ways is similar to Datapack, a card which was one of the most popular Netrunner cards in the game for a really long time. I think this shows up in almost every Worlds deck up until like 2015, something like that, in some respect. Just because this card rewarded you for doing something you were going to do anyways. It worked well with a certain breaker package that doesn't entirely exist anymore in the game. But if you're running central servers, generally how you win a lot of games, this gave you value. And people traded in that power counter for 1 strength on one of their breakers. Whether that's worth a credit or more, it's up to you to decide. Takobi sort of does that. Takobi rewards you for breaking ice. It doesn't reward you, it's not like Datapack where you can kind of capitalize on an uniced central server, and it's a lot slower. But 2 credits for +3 strength is definitely good, especially if you're going to break things anyways. Yeah, this is what the breaker suites that we're using Datapack worked around, Desperado and all that sort of stuff, so you can get more value. But compare this to Cyberdelia, right? So Cyberdelia came out, Delia came out in the last pack. Cyberdelia is 3 to install. It gives you an MU, but it says when you break an ice, you gain a credit the first time a turn. While Takobi says every time you break a single piece of ice, you get 1 power counter, which is basically worth 1.5 strength. Is 1.5 strength worth more than 1 credit? It depends on your deck. It really does. It depends on your deck. So these are technically somewhat comparable cards. Now, the cool thing with Takobi, it technically works best with cards that are expensive to boost their strength. And there's a fair bit of them in Netrunner. This is Inti, which is almost nothing to install. And it's 2 credits to boost 1 strength. And I guess you can, in theory, maybe consider a deck that runs Takobi and Inti as your only fractor. And hopefully you can break other ice on other servers or in different orders so that you can boost your Inti to deal with the rare, strong barriers that don't exist that much in at least the competitive meta. And you can get a lot of value with that. It's also very important to understand when this says +1 strength for the remainder of this run, these don't combo together, so if you use power counters to boost Inti, it won't keep the strength that were added through Takobi counters, but that's definitely worth knowing. You can get more value out of System Seizure too. You can boost an ice with Takobi, a breaker with Takobi to get more credits. This generally works well if you're using 1 breaker for everything, so maybe you're playing Kit, Riel Kit Peddler, and maybe all you need is to boost your Code Gate breaker, I don't know, for the rest of the run. There's also a lot of value in this with stealth. Stealth breakers run regularly. If you have a stealth suite, you generally have stealth credits, things like smoke, L smoke Skovac. So you want to be running relatively regularly. And if you're running regularly, it means you'll be getting regular Takobi counters. And boosting strength is actually more valuable on a lot of times on stealth breakers, because stealth breakers require stealth credits to be boosted. And if you can do that outside of stealth credits, you'll retain your stealth credits, which is good because that's actually one of your primary resources in how you interact with the corpse ice. So for instance, this might be a fair enough combo. Maybe Takobi fits relatively well in a stealth deck, a deck that's good at breaking ice anyways for cheap and you get extra value. Other cards like Mass Driver that start at 1 strength, I don't know, that's a push. But even cards like this, like Ankuza, which start at 0 strength, maybe all you need is to like use 4 Takobi counters to get this up to strength 6 so you can break a barrier for 2 credits and return it to hand, and maybe that's good enough. And you get value for doing what you want to do anyways. I don't know, it might be a bit slow, but it's technically value. I think we got to watch out for anytime in the near future we've seen an icebreaker that says on it specifically like the difference between its strength and another piece of ice. Maybe there's going to be a card upcoming that does that. I would kind of be surprised. But the idea with Takobi, like if you get that down turn 1, maybe by turn 17, if the game's not over, you'll have like a lot of counters on that. And then you don't have to pay to break ice or to boost ice. Yeah, I don't know. It's fine. It's fine. It's not data sucker good exactly. When I originally read this, by the way, I thought it was 1 host to power counter for 3 strength, and I thought that was like wild. So it's a bit slower, but it's definitely good. I can't make cards like this exciting. They should be though. There's a knife on it, I guess. This is our last Shaper card. It's called Kongomato. It is 1 to install. It's a virtual resource, only 1 influence, 2, and has a very, very simple ability. Trash, instant speed, break the first subroutine on the encountered piece of ice. The winged terror, the Kongomato dives from above, rending its prey in 1 ferocious bite. This is the Kongomato. You got a little image up there above my face. Kongomato means the breaker of boats, and it's a reported pterosaur-like creature that is said to be seen by the people and explorers in Mwenalunga district of Western Zambia, Angola, and Congo. An artist's recreation looks like this, the Kongomato, scary creature. The Wikipedia article goes on to believe that it might be actually this thing, the Rampornicus, which I don't think exists anymore. It's like an old dinosaur, but if it does exist, it might actually be this thing that people saw. That's a fucking terrifying looking thing. Well, that's a Kongomato. I'm actually kind of surprised that this isn't like a Weyland ice or something like that, but I guess Shapers did get a lot of kind of mythical creatures on their side of things, like the dead deer and all that, but so that's kind of cool, I guess. So yeah, very simple ability. Put down for 1, break the first subroutine on an encountered piece of ice. And it's the first subroutine. It's not the first subroutine that resolves, it's just the first subroutine. So it's actually kind of tricky of how to use this well. We've seen other cards that just don't deal with breaking, but like specifically breaking in the classic way that programs interact with ice. Things like Tracker that says you may prevent the first subroutine that would resolve. So in theory, if you pair these 2 together, I guess you can break through an ice with 2 subroutines. On top of that, you have cards like Street Magic, which I thought originally worked together. But this is, I guess they do work together, right? Break the first subroutine, but this is subroutine's unbroken subroutine. So I guess you could choose a subroutine. Let me know in the comments if I'm wrong about this. These might work together. There's some small synergy. Now, Kongomato would be kind of nutty. I think if E3 feedback implants still existed in the game. Sadly, it doesn't. But the idea with Kongomato and E3, it's basically like get through any piece of ice once. And that's really, really, really cool. It's also, yeah, it could pair with things like always be running. Maybe this is something that's good for the mini factions. I guess it's one influence. The problem I have with cards like this is for the install cost, it does not very much. There are some edge cases where breaking one subroutine is really, really, really good, but a lot of times you can just put a breaker in that case. So I think if this is going to shine in any deck, it's a deck that has very limited breaker options, or doesn't want to break a lot and spending its slots on something else, maybe some weird combo, or doesn't want to get rushed out, something like that, which Shaper does that a fair bit. It also might have like an inherent home with that trash icon with Geist. But Geist has a kind of, Geist's breakers are very similar to that, where you can just install them and get value regardless. His breakers are basically similar to this, but it's almost strictly better besides being limited by strength. Maybe actually that's a good way to use that sword. Any card that deck that runs a lot of these maybe wants Tech Trader just like Geist. This is Spy Camera Haley. This is a deck that used to be like incredibly popular in the meta for one point in 2016. And I try to look at this and try to see if you could put Kongomatos in this and make this deck work again. I'm not convinced. I think a big part of it is just because Replicator rotated, so Spy Camera spam is not that good in Shaper. But that's the sort of idea. It's a deck that runs 3 Tech Trader and it runs other weird ways to break things, like this deck run Panchatantra and then other cards that rotated like Sharpshooter. So not entirely possible anymore, but that was the idea. I think Apex is, again, one of those really narrow ideas of like, this is an ID that struggles to deal with certain ice, but having this means that Endless Hunger might not be able to not deal with certain subroutines, and then you can get off your dope Apocalypse, and I think that's kind of cool. Overall, it's a very niche card. I'm super excited to see this card in Draft, because that's kind of like the format where this succeeds. It's technically versatile when you don't have all your answers at once, but a lot of times when you're making a Netrunner deck, you'd rather have more permanent solutions to problems unless your deck is very specific. And I don't think there's currently a specific deck that I know that would want this ability that bad, but who knows? It's a scary bird. Who knows? That might come up. Okay, we have 2 more cards in this pack, and I think they're kind of nuts. This is the first one, and it's Emergent Creativity. It is an Atom card, which is so cool to see. This is the second card we've seen so far in the Kitara Cycle for a mini faction, and it looks like the mini factions are getting continued support. It's also the second 5 influence card we've seen for the mini factions, which is super rad. I'm going to read this card in a second, but the last card that we saw too, Assimilator for Apex, was such a wild card because I think there's an inherent problem with the mini factions, which is you have a very limited card pool, right? You have like 9 or so cards to deck build with mini factions, and then whatever you want to spend your influence on. So the problem is a lot of the mini faction decks look the same or play the same just because they don't have a lot to work with. And while we'll talk hopefully about Assimilator when we ever hopefully go through Sovereign Sight, I think it's such an interesting card because it blows open deck building for Apex and lets people show their creativity and flexibility of Apex. I think Emergent Creativity fits that mold too. This 5 influence card really opens up Atom deck building in a really, really big way. And I'm super excited that we're seeing these 5 influence cards for the mini factions that have strong effects that seem thematic. But also like really open up the deck building as opposed to saying like, oh, here's another like niche Atom trick or something like that. So this is Emergent Creativity. It's in a double event for 2 credits, so also 2 clicks, and it says trash any number of programs or pieces of hardware from your grip. Search your stack for a program or piece of hardware and install it, lowering its install cost by the total install cost of the things that you've trashed. Then go ahead and shuffle your stack. This is crazy. There's like so many parts of this card that are absolutely nuts. And then they just have more stuff on top of that. So firstly, what does it do? It finds programs and hardware from your deck and installs them. You pay 2 credits to tutor a card and then install them. So it's a double. So say you're spending the first click of the double finding it, second credit installing it. That's not unreasonable. If we just look at that alone, the idea that you're paying 2 credits to find a card and install a card makes it very similar to other options we've seen in other factions and we are very playable. Special Order only finds an Icebreaker program. It costs 1 credit and then you still have to install. So it's very comparable to Emergent Creativity. Emergent Creativity lets you find programs and hardware. Similar self-modifying code, if you get this on a table, it is free. It does cost a click and 2 MU, and clicklessly, which is very important, you can pay that 2 credits to find your program and install it. So actually very, very comparable to those two, but this does more than that. Not only this can find programs, but also they can find hardware. And this game has not had hardware tutors that have been of this level of power ever. I think there's only 2 hardware tutors in the game. Trade-in, which is incredibly slow and needs another installed piece of hardware. Then you trash it, get some sort of rebate, and then the card that you wanted to tutor stays in your hand. And like Chison Observatory, which you have to install this thing, then spend 2 clicks to use it, and then install your hardware. Hardware tutoring has been so restricted in the game in Netrunner, and this kind of blows it wide open, at least as much as a 5 influence card can, so largely with only an Atom. And that's not only what it does, anything that you throw out gives you a rebate on the thing that you install. So if you have multiple things that you want to install, like say you have a monolith in your deck for some reason, and you have a monolith in your hand, you throw out your first monolith to search your stack to install the second monolith for free. That's nuts! As not great as monolith might be, but that is absolutely insane. If you want to install any expensive thing, just run multiple copies of it and you'll end up installing it for free as long as your draw isn't terrible. I'm not reading this wrong, right? I'm going to search your stack of program-based hardware installed logs. Yeah, that's crazy. It's also very, very, very worth mentioning 2 things. Firstly, trash any number of programs or pieces of hardware. That actually is going to be updated in the FAQ. It's been clarified in the unofficial FAQ that should say and or. So you can throw out a combination of programs and or hardware to get whatever you want. It doesn't have to be strictly programs or strictly hardware. Secondly, you can throw out nothing, which is a really big deal. If Emergent Creativity is the only card in your hand, you can still pay it as a 2-credit tutor for whatever you want that you install at full cost. And installing things at full cost is what you're going to do half the time anyways. But anyways, I digress. The idea that you can throw out a Maw from your hand to install a Maw, or even that in an Atom deck, you can run 1 copy of hardware. And again, there's been no hardware tutor, so if you want to have a cool console in your deck, you generally have to run more than 1. But now Atom can run a single Maw in its deck and find it. You don't even have to throw anything out. Pay 2 credits, install your Maw for 6. Maybe you're going to do that anyways. Security Nexus is also a really big deal. You can install Security Nexus likely for free. Put 2 or 3 of these in your Atom deck. Maybe 2 is all you need, and you might install it for free. You throw out the other Security Nexus. Also works on programs. Install your Fem for free. Maybe you throw out another Fem. Maybe you're running 3 Fems. That's only 1 influence. If you're running that many Fems, also throw in other expensive programs like Inversificator. Install this for free. That's a really good program. Or your Atom, right? You got extra hardware that you don't need. You can throw this out. Even if you throw out a brain chip to install like an Inversificator for 4, it's not bad. You can even consider running like niche tech hardware, like 1 copy of Kanju PT, arguably not the best example of hardware tech, but you could find this if you need it in your deck and it doesn't cost you that much. And if you don't need it, you throw it out and get reductions on other things. And you do need card draw. If you want to get full value of Emergent Creativity, maybe you want to throw out your whole hand. So independent thinking can help you with that. Sometimes you also just want to get cards out of your hand because you have safety first. So being able to throw cards out of your hand is good so you can continue to draw for clicklessly, which is really cool. You also get like a nuts amount of value by throwing out heap breakers. If someone's crazy enough to put this card in an Anarch deck, imagine throwing out like 2 paper clips in your bin so they're good, and then you install your Maw for free. Is that worth 5 influence in an Anarch deck? No, but can you play paperclip in an Atom deck? 100% you can. There's so much value in this thing. It's kind of crazy. It tutors programs, it tutors hardware, which is insane. It gives you a reduction on the cost. In some cases, the most expensive hardware you could possibly imagine is free, as long as you run more than 1 copy. It's not ass. It's not the worst thing if you don't draw well. It's still like, oh, I'll pay 4 credits or whatever to bring my brain chip in. It's good. It's real good. It makes the other ones look bad. I'm excited to play Atom. I'm gonna play Security Nexus Atom. It's gonna be cool. I'm gonna find my Maw. It'll be good. 5 influence too, huh? And this, a lot of people say, is also the better Atom card in this pack, and they might be right, but this is not strictly an Atom card, but this card needs to be discussed. This is the last card. It's RNG Key. It's nothing to install. It's 1 MU. It's a neutral program. There's only like, I think 3 other in the game, maybe 2 other. This is really exciting. 3 other. It's unique, so only 1, and it costs no influence. It's proper neutral, and it says the first time you make a successful run on HQ or R&D each turn, Name a number. If you do, reveal the next card that you access this run. If it has a res cost, play cost, or advancement requirement equal to the named number, you can choose to gain 3 credits or draw 2 cards. Dang. Remember Temujin Contract? If you put this card on R&D, you ran R&D, you got 4 credits. It was like running on R&D was 4 cheaper. In theory, if this fires, running on R&D is 3 cheaper. Is that going to happen all the time? No. Sometimes you're going to guess, but sometimes it is going to happen all the time. This is Find the Truth. And again, this card works really well in Atom. With Find the Truth, whenever you make a successful run, you'll see the top card of R&D. So if you're running R&D, you get to see the top card of R&D, and then you can choose RNG Key, and then just say whatever number of the cost of the card you saw to gain 3 credits or draw 2 cards, up to you. And it's not like Find the Truth is bad on its own. It's not like RNG's Key is bad on its own. These cards are an insane synergy together. And there's other ways to get the synergy outside of Atom. Mind you, this is only a 3 influence card, and it's good in basically any runner. Equivocation is probably a bit less synergistic because you reveal the top card of R&D, and then you're not going to use Equivocation's like ability to multi-axis if you want to like safely use RNG Key, but technically it's possible. You have other things like spy cameras, so you can see the top card of R&D and get some RNG Key value. Spy camera only works so often. You only have 6 of them if you don't levy your deck and go again. You also have indexing largely, which sometimes will work out if you see the top card of the deck. Sometimes it will. It's also important to understand this is the first card you access, so if say there are upgrades on central servers on HQ and R&D, you can choose to access the upgrade first, and if you don't trash it, I think it's almost impossible to trash upgrades on central servers, which means that this will always be there. Now, admittedly, most upgrades on central servers you want to trash because they're there for a reason, but there's a chance that you can get your like, oh, you put Brian Stinson on HQ, joke's on you, I'm going to get 3 credits every time I run it. And that's really cool. But even beside all those effects where you see the top card of R&D, and I think by far Find the Truth is so good, I think just going for it is kind of fine and kind of really exciting. This is this really cool thing that this card does. It makes every run on the central server, the first run of turn, like an exciting game. An exciting game of information, an exciting game of memory, an exciting game of meta knowledge. Say you're playing Gabriel Santiago, you drop RNG Key, you run HQ. Just guess a number. And guess a number intelligently, like it's really going to be kind of skill testing. If you're running against HB or like a cerebral imaging deck, for instance, you maybe know what kind of cards they hold in hand. There's certain cards they hold and you can make a calculated guess. I guess with cerebral imaging, they have a lot of cards in hand, so it's not the best example. But if a corp has 5 cards in hand and maybe you ran HQ twice already and you know 2 of them, you have a pretty good guess. Maybe you've seen what they draw on R&D and they didn't install it. You have a pretty good guess. Maybe you're playing against HB, right? And you're running R&D and you haven't seen any Adonis campaigns. Maybe you haven't seen any Architects. You haven't seen any Biotic Labors. Maybe guessing 4 is a good idea. It's really cool. It really tests you on knowing what kind of cards in the deck. Are you playing an NBN? Are they holding closed accounts in their hand? Are they holding exchange of information? Maybe I should say 1 or 0. That's dope. It's also really cool that you can choose what happens after you reveal the card. So you reveal the card and then say you see it's an Adonis campaign or it's a Biotic Labor. Say a Biotic Labor, right? And then you'd be like, okay, well actually I want to draw 2 cards now because I want to find my like fast advance answer. Or maybe you see on the top of the deck it's like, oh, I just accessed the hard-hitting news. Okay, well I'm going to gain 3 credits so you can't trace me. Like you can choose this after you see the card, which is so cool because it's another really intelligent play decision where after you've guessed correctly, you can choose how to react to what you've seen. And I think that's so cool. This card's incredibly powerful. I think even in the case where you don't have a card synergy with it, it's still really good. And that's because it's not a big tempo cost to install this thing. It just takes up MU. It doesn't take up any memory, it doesn't take up any influence. You put this down, you're going to be running central servers. You might as well take a guess. Every once in a while it'll work out. Just don't guess like 17, because that doesn't make a lot of sense. But you can guess your favorite number. Hope your favorite number is around 1 to 4. It's cool. Now, I'm actually worried that this is going to be super prevalent, but there are a lot of ways to deal with it as a corp. As a corp, you actually get some advantages. Well, firstly, best defense, and I'm not the biggest fan of best defense. It's like a very brutal way to deal with RNG Key. Also, if it deals with Find the Truth, if this becomes like a popular combo. But if people are playing 2 RNG Keys in every deck, maybe best defense becomes meta, and then RNG Key like disappears slowly. Don't love the design of best defense. It's just like, screw you, your thing is done. I think another thing that's not worth like understating is you reveal the card to the corp, which means the corp is going to see what they're going to draw ideally somewhere in the middle of their turn. So for instance, if you reveal the corp's going to draw a biotic labor on a R&D, sure, you gain 3 credits or draw 2 cards. The corp can now play their game around it, being like, oh, I know I'm going to draw the biotic, so I'm going to keep 7 credits or 8 credits, 7 credits, so I can fast events out, stuff like that. I think that's a really big deal. So corps do get some information knowing where they're going to top deck, but it's still really, really strong. Really strong card. I'm really excited to play this, even with no support, because it's going to be fun. And still competitive. What a good card. And that's it. That's the end of the line. Those are the 9 runner cards we have in down the White Nile. We have some really interesting stuff. Again, these cards, it's really hard to tell how good they're going to be if we don't see enough virus support yet. But the idea is there. Credit kiting is not Siphon, but it's technically a cool card. And Wari, I'm not convinced just yet. Kabonesa is cool. Problem is, I guess Shapers can already tutor. She needs to do something more or better with it, and we haven't seen it just yet. And dang, these cards are great. I'm really excited about the Kitara Cycle so far. We've seen a lot of cool stuff. I'm glad they're printing more like strong 5 influence cards, stuff like that. It's really cool to see. Let me know. There's a lot of interactions that I probably missed in this review. Let me know in the comments. I got to catch up on some old YouTube comments. I haven't been here for a while, but let me know what you think. And stay tuned. Hopefully, rather shortly, we'll have the corpse side where we have 11 cards. And let me tell you, they're pretty good too. Thanks for watching. Ciao.